Hi, everybody. Welcome to this latest episode of Real Talk with Rick. So that email that came through, it's all right doing it. You know, funny, I've got like 20 emails since we started, and I never heard that come through. You were able to get that
I just turned it up so that I could hear what
Yeah.
Jenifer was saying when she answered that question, and I forgot to shut the sound off.
Sound off the emails?
Yep.
Am I good?
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this latest episode of Real Talk with Rick. I'm excited to have on very active, important Eden Prairie resident, Jenifer Loon. Jenifer, for 10 years, beginning when at least I started as city manager for those first 10 years, served as state representative, representing a large chunk of Eden Prairie in the state legislature. But since she's left office, she's been very busy with many other local endeavors. So she came on to talk about one of the new initiatives out there that she's working on with a group of residents since the Eden Prairie newspaper, Eden Prairie News, folded. So that was kind of the impetus for her coming on the podcast, but I obviously had been wanting to talk to her for quite some time. So we had a good discussion about her time prior to moving to Eden Prairie, her time in the Minnesota House as our legislature, and what she's working on these days. So here is my discussion with Jenifer Loon. So Jenifer Loon, thank you for being a part of the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick.
Yes, it's great to have you here. Actually, I've been telling people that I'm having J-Lo on my podcast. Do you get called that ever?
Actually, this is a little secret, but one of my former colleagues in the legislature who's still there used to call me that and give me a hard time because somehow I let it slip that one of my neighbors calls me that.
Yeah.
And so I will never live it down. So apparently the secret is out.
Yeah. Well, it's we'll see what I think it's going to really drive more listeners if we put out that J-Lo's coming on. But you are still a very well-known Eden Prairie resident and a big part of the community. So even if it's Jenifer Loon, we'll still get a lot of listeners, but I think we can kind of push the J-Lo thing a little bit and see where we go.
We'll try to stem the disappointment that it's not Jennifer Lopez. So sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Well, thanks again for coming in, and I do want to get to a lot of what you're working on now, but and how your time in the legislature, because when I met you, you were Eden Prairie State Representative, and that's how I got to know you. But I also know that you're not originally from here. So maybe before we get to that point, if you're comfortable telling us where you grew up and where you're from.
Sure. Well, going way, way back to the beginning, I actually grew up in South Dakota. I'm a farm girl, raised on a small dairy farm outside of Willow Lake, South Dakota. I don't know if you have comments from listeners, but I'll offer a prize to the first person who knows actually where that is. Very small town.
What's the closest city that we would know?
Larger city would be probably Watertown, South Dakota.
Sure. Watertown's familiar.
Yeah. So grew up on a farm there and went to Augustana College. It's now Augustana University in Sioux Falls.
Sure.
And eventually ended up working in Washington, D.C. and living out there for a number of years. And then my husband and I moved to Eden Prairie in 1998. So we've been here, going on 22 years.
Where did you meet your husband, the well-known Douglas Loon?
Douglas Loon. Well, Doug and I actually went to college together. A little funny. We went to college together. We're in the same major, government affairs / political science, but did not date at college. We both separately pursued jobs in Washington, D.C., and started dating out there.
Okay.
Got married. Yeah.
Okay. For those of you listening, maybe I think he should be a future guest. I'd like to have him in, but we'll have to separate you two for a period of time. There's no set rules on relatives or relations.
You could have us on together, and we could tell you about, how well we get along and what we do at home. But
that's what it would be all about.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Well, see, that would be what the whole podcast would be about. So I wouldn't hear about all his work with the State Chamber of Commerce or your work in the community, but that would be fun to listen to. Yeah, Augustana, actually, I have a very good friend of ours. Her daughter played soccer there,
Yeah.
and that's how I heard of the university or the college. Or he said that it changed names, but Sioux Falls is a great city. So then to D.C. and then to Eden Prairie in '98. So what were you doing? What kind of what was your career then when you were in D.C. and then in Eden Prairie before you got interested and ran in local politics?
Yeah, so I did a few different things in Washington, D.C. When I went there after I graduated from college, I got a job with a U.S. Senator's office, U.S. Senator Larry Pressler. He was one of those senators from South Dakota. And so I worked in his office as a legislative assistant for almost 3 years. I left and went to a little trade association, did some lobbying for them, and then wanted to go back to Capitol Hill. I found an office in the House side. A congresswoman from Kansas, Jan Myers, was actually now deceased, passed away last year. But wonderful woman, congresswoman. And so I was her legislative director, and then she was high-ranking and became chair of the House Small Business Committee, and she had me be her chief of staff on that committee. So I was with her almost 7 years.
Okay. Was that Pressler connection through your hometown and through school that connected you in South Dakota? Because you said he's a U.S. Senator representing South Dakota?
Yes, he was at the time. I did an internship in his office when I was in college. I learned that the congressional offices had internship programs. And so I applied for one. I did a program, so during the interim or the J-term program at Augustana, I and a friend went out and transferred to a college in Baltimore for the month of January, took a class, and then on the weekends we traveled around. We stopped in D.C. and learned about the internship program in Pressler's office. Doug was actually, my husband, was interning there at the time. And so we stopped to see a mutual friend, learned about it. So I applied. And
this would have been in the 80s?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because I remember Pressler because, I mean, he was a U.S. Senator for almost 20 years.
Yeah, a long time.
Covered South Dakota for a long period of time. I mean, I'm a Wisconsin native, and you talked about a dairy farm, so there's a connection there. So then, as you said, working in Washington quite a bit, what brought you to Eden Prairie or the Twin Cities then?
Yeah, so we had both of our daughters. We have two daughters while we lived in Washington, D.C. area, but we really wanted to come back to the Midwest to raise them. All of our extended family was back here between South Dakota and Minnesota, so it was really a plan to leave that area. So my husband at the time was working for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and they had a series of regional offices. They had an opening for one in the Midwest region. And so Doug basically approached his boss, and he said, we're going to be leaving one way or the other. They really wanted him to stay with the U.S. Chamber, and so he was able to get them to agree that they would allow him to work in the field in the Midwest regional office, and that's what brought us here. So he moved the office to Eden Prairie. We moved to Eden Prairie. And we looked at a lot of suburban areas to move, and actually in also Minneapolis as well. We fell in love with the neighborhoods of Eden Prairie. We found a house with beautiful tree-lined street, great place for our kids to play and grow up. And
the house you still live in.
Yes, the house we still live in, the same house.
Yes, absolutely. That was your choice to move. What kind of brought your interest then in it? Probably, if I get this correct, it probably took then 10 years from when you moved here to running for a state representative. What was that path?
Yeah, and honestly, it was not something I had planned to do. I enjoyed working for elected officials. The federal,
like I do. That's
yes,
what I do.
Yes,
yeah.
And I was very fulfilling career doing that. But so when we moved to Eden Prairie, I was not working at the time. We had just had our second baby, Rachel, our baby was a year and a half maybe when we moved. So I was a stay-at-home mom at that point. So we moved to Eden Prairie. I stayed at home with the girls for, it was about 6 years total until the youngest was in all-day kindergarten, had just started. It was the second year of the program here in Eden Prairie, and it was a great fit for her. When we moved, our oldest was kindergarten and a year and a half. So, and I just became very involved in the schools.
Okay.
PTO president at Eden Lake, did a lot. I was always in the classroom volunteering, reading programs, the class parties back when that was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
And just very active locally. So I think that's what ultimately spurred me to run when it was an open seat. And then after the girls went all-day school, I did start back to work first part-time and then full-time. There was a trade association, national in scope but based in Minnesota, that needed somebody with federal legislative experience, ACA International, so
Okay.
financial services, a trade association. So I went to work for them. I worked for them for about 4 years.
Okay.
But I was having to travel back and forth to Washington, D.C. to make visits to congressional offices, and my husband's job required him to travel a lot at that time. So it was a little too chaotic for family life. So
And at the time it sounds like the kids were in kind of that middle school, heading maybe into high school.
Yeah.
So.
When I first ran, let's see, Rachel was 5th grade going into 6th, and Erica was 9th grade. So yeah, like 10 and 14.
Okay.
So yeah, nobody was driving.
Right.
That was kind of a problem. So
Right.
it was very hectic.
Yeah, no, I have 3 daughters, all 3 years apart, and I'm still driving the youngest. Well, but here, what happens is then you get the older ones to drive the younger one
Right.
too. But then when one of them goes off to college, then
Yes.
you
Yes.
have to pick it up a little bit more. But so yeah, very active in the school district. And you mentioned there was an open seat, and so I met you when I came here in 2011, but this would have been 2008. 2008, and it became an open seat for one of our state representative districts because that was Eric Paulson, and he became our congressional representative,
Yes.
right?
So that was in 2000, towards the end of 2007, Jim Ramstad, Congressman Ramstad, longtime representative for the 3rd Congressional District, announced his retirement. He would not seek re-election. Eric Paulson had served in the State House representing the seat, which is now 48B, for 14 years. And he made the announcement that he would seek the seat, and then the search was on to find someone to run for the State House seat. And so he and other people approached me to do it. I honestly sat on that decision for several months.
Yeah.
Just, with my background and knowing what it took to run for office, I was cautious about the decision, but ultimately decided I felt like I had the skills to do a good job. I was really in love with the community. I could bring value to it, so decided to run.
Was there a primary?
No, there was not a primary. The whole endorsement process, the party endorsement, there was a contested endorsement. There were 2 of us running. I did win that endorsement contest at the party level.
Who was the other person, you remember?
Yes, Kathy Vierink.
And then who did you run against then in the general election?
Jerry Pitzrick was my first opponent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like I said, that after that, I'm aware of everything that happened because I was working here. But so then you are in the Minnesota House, and I know this maybe came later on that you were very involved in education, obviously, because that was your background. I'm as a city manager. My time with you had a lot more to do with city operations, and you were so helpful and so receptive and so available on all kinds of city issues as well. I just want to thank you for that again.
Sure.
We've had that conversation privately that you've been one of the most available elected officials that I've ever worked with at the state level. But you all, like I said, you did quite a bit with education. You were the chair of the House Education Finance Committee. But I'll let you speak on maybe what you would consider some of those highlights of your 10 years at the state legislature.
Sure. Well, and thanks for the nice comments. One of the things that, one of the reasons I wanted to run was to be very available to the community. And so it's nice to have you say that. So, you know, I had the chance to work on a lot of really interesting issues. And in thinking about this, probably two categories. One is issues that I felt were more significant in terms of their statewide impact, but also then some local things. So, the Surly bill or the taproom bill is what I think a lot of people might remember me for.
Yes.
And not that it was just, me pushing on particularly liquor issues, because I also authored the Sunday sales bill. But more when I ran, I wanted to help small businesses and help tear down unnecessary regulations or laws that stood in their way. And so when a brewery owner, Omar Ansari, approached me and other members, he had this vision of building where he made his beer but have a tap room where people could come and buy glasses of the product and try it, a destination brewery. And he could have gone to Wisconsin to open it because the law didn't stand in his way, or many other states, but it did in Minnesota. So when I look at what has happened since that law that I authored passed in 2011, the craft brewery scene has boomed in Minnesota.
Unbelievable.
And I mean, look at even Fat Pants Brewery. That would not have been possible in 2010. And so what it's meant, as I look at it, is they have become not just places that produce beer, but they are community gathering places, right?
Yeah.
Kids and dogs and people are playing games and hanging out with their neighbors. They have been almost the community town hall, and across Minnesota, small town, suburban, urban, very cool. So that's been a really, I think it's been very beneficial, and it allowed a lot of businesses to start.
Small bit. It's amazing how we talked about the minute that passed and it just exploded, and you had 10 or 11 tap rooms in Northeast Minneapolis, all within a mile of each other, and then they were popping up in all these other communities. And Minnetonka gets one, and then you get Badger Hill and Shakopee, and Steel Toe in St. Louis Park, and then LTD in Hopkins. Maybe I'm showing too much knowledge of this, but either way,
how have you done your research?
Right. Well, from now on, every visit to a tap room will start with a cheer to Jenifer Loon for making this happen. But but we were talking about that's something that Eden Prairie needs, and it was kind of a goal of the chamber and city officials to get that same presence here in Eden Prairie. Now we do have a distillery and a tap room, but you're right. It's hard to believe that was 2011.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and all it took was a change to the law.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably people that have moved here just 5 years ago thinking that tap rooms have been a part of the landscape for forever. I mean, Summit has been around for a long, long time, but
yes.
you could tour Summit, you could go there, but
right.
It wasn't the full tap room experience.
Yep.
But
yep.
Yeah, that and the Sunday liquor.
Yeah.
Sunday liquor. We had quite a few conversations about that because the city's in the business of liquor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And hopefully it's worked out well for the city. But, I mean, aside from those things, I mean, again, as you mentioned, I was chair of the Education Finance Committee. Education was really what got me involved with the community. I'm very passionate about public education. And so, a lot of things I worked on in that arena, I'm still really passionate about, and I do a lot of volunteering in, mentoring for kids. I've been a mentor at the high school since my youngest graduated with a program called Strive. And one of the things I did is I authored a pilot grant for Eden Prairie schools to expand their mentoring program. Strive is for juniors and seniors. The pilot program allowed them to expand that program to junior high, so from 7th grade on up. Very important. It's such a huge boost to kids who need an extra bit of support to get through school successfully. I also really pushed hard for more mental health services for kids. Wherever I went, when I traveled as chair of the finance committee, small towns, rural, urban, suburban, everybody was seeing a greater need for mental health services for students. Students were just coming with a lot more issues that they needed help working through to be successful with their education. And so I sponsored funding for grants. I pushed on every lever I could. And I was actually recognized by the National Association on Mental Illness by NAMI of Minnesota in 2018 as Legislator of the Year for my work on that. And something that still needs effort and attention, but something I'm just really proud of.
Absolutely, and in this COVID environment, it's coming to the surface even more.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, mental health, huge issue, and you've been doing that. You know, you did that your entire time, and still continue to advocate for that. Now that, I was saying earlier before we started taping that as you drive around the community or any other community and see all those signs all over the place, at least you can say you don't have to worry about a campaign season, right?
Yeah, it's kind of nice. I mean, I do miss it a little bit, but at the same time, I do not miss putting signs in the ground.
And picking them up.
Yes, even worse, the picking up.
Yes.
Because it almost always would snow or sleety rain right after Election Day, and then you've got a truckload of wet, dirty signs.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's interesting. Obviously, I don't know how the door knocking is working. You don't have to worry about that right now, but in this environment, that's a totally different scenario too. But the position that you were in Congress, it's every election you're on the ballot. So that I can just think that would be a little bit be a lot of work.
It was. Although I will say, door knocking was a great opportunity to talk to people, to get to know what's on their minds. So it kept you so connected. And it's tough. COVID has really forced a lot of changes and a lot of adjustments to people. But I kind of feel sorry for candidates if they're not able to door knock, because there's no better way to get to know your community than walking it block by block and knocking on doors.
Yeah, and I'm sure they still are,
Yes.
Just distant and masked. And,
Right.
But I think it changes the landscape a little bit for people that might not want to open their door.
True.
It's just, it's obviously a different environment. So what are you working on these days? What are your passions right now then?
Yeah, so, I've always been involved in volunteering even while I served in the legislature. But, with that departure a couple of years ago, I've just really thrown myself into nonprofit boards and nonprofit leadership. So I've been on the board of Prop this is my 6th year, but this year I'm the chair of the board. And so we recently did a food drive.
Prop people reaching out to other people.
Yes, and yes, Prop Food Shelf, and we had a tremendous response from the community. I mean, over 25,000 pounds of food were collected in one weekend, and again, it's just such a testament to who Eden Prairie is as a community and the people who live in it. If you put out the call, people will respond, and they want to help neighbors in need, and so that's been amazing. And again, things you never thought you'd have to deal with. I mean, how do you deal with COVID? How do you provide services for people when you can't meet face-to-face and you can't have a bunch of volunteers in a small space sorting through donated rescue food? Our executive director, Janet Palmer's been terrific in figuring it out. We haven't closed a day. We haven't missed a beat. All the same services are being offered. We've just adjusted our models a little bit. So in addition to Prop, I'm also on the board of Onward Eden Prairie. It's a transitional housing program for homeless or housing instability or unstable youth. So ages 18 to 22, roughly. We have a house in Eden Prairie that a local church owns. We are the nonprofit that manages the program. And we can house 4 young people at a time, and they get counseling and services along with a very affordable room and common space to live. So that's been, really part of my passion in terms of trying to help young people get off to a good start and help them launch. And so that's been great. Very active with Rotary. And then the last thing I've added recently is the Eden Prairie local news. And we're trying to get a new news source locally off the ground since the Eden Prairie newspaper stopped publication in April of this year. And I think horrible timing just in terms of with all of the questions around services and things that are available to people as COVID has impacted citizens and businesses and schools and you name it. And so just a group of volunteers, and the Eden Prairie Community Foundation and Mark Weber, their executive director, has been really terrific with acting as convener for bringing a group of citizens together. The group voted to have me be the chair of the working group, and we are trying to create a nonprofit news service. We're in the process of applying for our own 501c3 status. We've got sort of folks that work on the business side. I'm kind of heading that up. We've got some volunteer journalists with journalism backgrounds, very qualified people who've stepped forward to do the writing and photography and that. And so we're getting our website launched. We've got some material up there, and yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, and I was going to say, from knowing that group was getting together, I think at the outset, a testament to the group is, there was quite a bit of media coverage on, that Eden Prairie, lost one of their local newspapers, and that this group of volunteers is stepping up to fill the gap. And I think, I read about it in the Star Tribune. I don't know if it was CCO, but I think you got on TV, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. We had a little TV coverage.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of interest, and we get people that reach out to us from seeing those stories, and it's the response has been really, really positive.
So what will be the business model? How will that work? Like you talked about, you said that you're going to start up, the website, which there's already some news on that. It's a nonprofit. So will you solicit donations, sell advertising?
Yeah.
How will that all work?
Yeah, all of the above. So we'll establish ourselves. Again, we're applying with, you've got to get permission, obviously, from the IRS to be a nonprofit. And the working group will then morph into a board of directors that will handle the policies and the operations of it. There will probably be a sort of a committee of journalistic standards and ethics to handle any issues that may come up with writing or handle any questions about stories. But we will be seeking donations from people, a sort of a voluntary subscription, if you will. We'll also be just seeking sponsorship for either sponsored content, or you can have your logo and that as a sponsor of the Eden Prairie Local News on our website. And advertising. We're hoping also that local businesses will find this would be a good spot to advertise their services or their products locally to our readership. And so all of that is coming together, and we've got a fundraising committee put together. I think you recently had Roy Terwilliger on. And,
I did.
And he's heading up that effort for the Eden Prairie Local News. So, again, it's been wonderful to see pillars of the community who help build up many of the organizations and groups that exist within Eden Prairie coming together again, and others to say, you know what, our community's always had a local paper. We need a local news source. And they've been very helpful in really gelling the effort behind this.
Yeah, I recall, there's just certain things that you can only get from a local newspaper. So you would get, some human interest stories that are in your community that are not going to make a larger newspaper, that aren't necessarily on other groups' websites. Local high school sports coverage.
Right. That's a big one.
I remember that. That was just such a huge no one else covers that.
Right. No, absolutely true. And like I said, we're now in election season. So when people are looking for information kind of all in one spot, like who are the candidates running for city council or school board, even the local legislative races, a lot of the larger metropolitan papers, I know for many years when I was running, the Star Tribune would do sort of an election guide for people running for the legislature. They stopped doing that in 2018. So,
and they, like you said, they would not cover unless maybe even it's a very, very large city or a majorly contested race with controversy, they don't get to the school board and the city council or even some state representative races.
Right. Yeah. No, so, there's a real need for, again, all things local, what's going on locally, covering what's happened at the city council meeting or the school board meetings. historical, we've got a very active historical society here in Eden Prairie, and those are always some of the favorite features about sites around town, people around town. So there is no shortage of news to coverage. There's always things going on in a city our size, and I think again, there's a definite void from not having a local newspaper or news site. So we're working hard to make it a good one, and hopefully have us up and publishing before long.
That's great. And you said up and publishing. Is there, and I'm not asking you to commit to this, but is there a part of the plan that has a printed product that may come out at some point in time? Yeah,
it's something we're exploring. Again, I think obviously financially we need to make sure that we're viable. So for right now, we're going to pursue a website, so it'll be a digital news source, but there is a desire to see if we could do a printed edition. So we're doing some research on that.
Sure. Good. Well, I'll put you on the spot here. So you've been very busy with the work with Prop and the local news group and Strive and Onward Eden Prairie. Do you see political office in your future again? Where are you at with that?
Oh, gosh. Not right now. And I only hesitate because I'm like, never say never. And
Too many politicians have gotten in trouble for that, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're not a politician right now.
I'm not, and I'm really loving what I'm doing. And I think it comes back to why I ran in the first place. I just love doing things for my community. And I like helping other people and finding a way to be of service. So, and there's many ways to do that. And I love the time that I spent in office, but I'm also finding my time out of office very fulfilling, able to do good things. So it's not a need that I see in myself to have to run for political office to do that. So
sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a great place to be. You really enjoyed your time in what you did, but you've been able to do many other things. So
Absolutely.
it's not something missing from your life, but yet you look back fondly.
I do.
That's great.
I do. And it's one of the things I think, politics can be so fractious and divisive. And it's unfortunate that that's the case because, especially at the local levels, but at every level, you need dedicated people who will run for office, who will put the hard work into it, and it is very hard work. And so, if I could say anything, I would just want to say for anyone ever thinking about it, I think it's truly a noble calling to want to serve others, serve your community at whatever level. And I hope people are not so turned off that if it's something that they feel is within them, that they won't pursue it. Because win or lose, if you run, I don't think you'll ever sorry for the experience you'll have along the way.
Well, and I think we all need throughout the entire state and the country good people to be in elected office. So we would hope that it would still be something where people would be able to do that and give back. I think this. What was your salary when you were in the Minnesota House? A whopping like $30,000 a year.
Yeah,
I think it was
$31,400.
Yeah, so I think that's part of the issue too. Is that many other people, need to work full-time jobs, and that's an issue for some candidates. And then I think that you talked about working back in the 80s for Senator Pressler and in Washington. And I think also, there's a lot that's changed in the last 20 or 30 years, too, where I think it's more difficult to be able to maybe be, I wouldn't call it independent, but...
I think, political courage is in somewhat short supply. I mean, if I can be philosophical about that. I mean, in some cases you do it at your own peril. I mean, I definitely took very prominent votes against my party platform while I served in office.
There was one big one.
A big one.
There was one big one.
Yeah. A few others along the way that did not get as much attention, but and had to go through a primary over that, and that's fine. I would have done the same again. I think.
By the way, the one big one, because I don't want to gloss over it, because it was the same-sex marriage bill.
Yep.
And you were, one of only a few Republicans that, would be voting for it. right?
Right.
Okay, but because you felt that that's where the Eden Prairie, the community that you represented was, but not necessarily your party, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, the party platform was against it. But again, I mean, there was a constitutional amendment on the ballot. It was very clear from the vote from this community, the opposition to it. You know, I spent a lot of time talking to people, surveying people, listening to people over that issue. And so, again, I feel strongly that when you're a representative, you are there to be the voice collectively for 39,000 people. It's not one person's view or one party's view, and that is your responsibility. And so, again, I think some of that's lost. It's hard, and I do think also the parties in that are much more polarized. There are fewer sort of more moderate or middle of the road people serving in office today. It's just a fact. I mean, the pendulum kind of swings, and I think some of the more middle of the road people, and I would include myself in that, were swept out in 2018. And so, we'll see what happens, in future elections and that. But it is harder because, again, you take positions that maybe will alienate some folks in your own party, and you're maybe not enough for one or too much for the other side. But at the end of the day, when you're trying to solve difficult problems, it usually doesn't work to have sort of winners and losers. Everybody gives up a little something and gives a little bit to try to come to a solution that both sides can live with and to move forward to make progress in solving a problem. And so, again, it's those skills are what you need to have in people that can be good public servants and do the public's business.
Good. Well, I mean, for someone that did it for the period of time you did, that's great advice. So what, in terms of, wrapping up here a little bit, and thank you again for coming in, maybe just a couple questions about, again, a COVID environment kind of takes away from some of what we can do, outside of our homes these days. But what, just real quick, in terms of Eden Prairie, what would you say would be maybe your favorite place to go or relax, maybe your favorite place to eat? What are some of your highlights of our city?
There's so many, but I would say I love live music of all kinds, and so the concerts at Starring Lake.
Yeah. Which we still had this summer.
Yes, and I was at one of them, and and you had a nice crowd, and they did a great job of distancing people and having it all set up. It was really pretty seamless, and so that's something I've always enjoyed, whether it's the theater productions or the live music. Enjoyed that. Love to go out to eat.
Yeah.
And local restaurants. I have a hard time picking favorites. There's like a few favorite dishes.
Yeah. What are some of the favorite dishes?
Oh, gosh. So Redstone has an ahi tuna appetizer that I absolutely love. It's sort of sushi-like, and it's just delicious. I love a Lion's Tap hamburger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the wildfire chopped salad is a staple at our house, probably once a week or so. So enjoy so much a Tavern 4 and 5, the meatballs, those chicken meatballs with the spicy sauce. I mean, there's so many things. So I love it. And that's one thing that I've missed with COVID, not going out as much. So,
and you see, I've noticed driving around that there are people outside, and they're able to sit outside. But I'm a little worried about when winter comes, and I think there's quite a bit of takeout going on, but takeout is different.
Yes.
All those dishes you mentioned, you can still get.
You can.
Takeout, but it is a little bit different.
Yes, and please support your local restaurants. I feel, the service-oriented business like that have really suffered during COVID. And, so I hope as people are able to, they will support them and help them get through when the winter comes.
Yeah, and knock on wood, I've yet to hear of any closings of any restaurants in Eden Prairie like the ones you've mentioned. I know all throughout the metro we're seeing some of these independent restaurants dropping like flies, unfortunately. And I think over time there'll be other ones to come fill those spaces at different times. But, the Shields is opening up. We're going to have a Lake Winds grocery store, a Chick-fil-A as part of that development. So we're seeing, new retail coming in, and I hope that continues.
Right. But you're right. The small independents have really, really taken a hit. And again, trying to have consumers support that kind of independent small businesses and entrepreneurship, I think, is super important. Yeah,
absolutely. And then lastly, you just had a birthday, didn't you?
I did.
Yes.
Although I did say to folks who wrote on my Facebook page that the extra year does not count because of COVID. So, and I'm sticking to that. But I did I did go out. I was out for lunch with friends on a beautiful patio, and it was a very nice time.
Good. No, the idea that you still want to be able to, in small groups, celebrate.
Any excuse for cake.
Any excuse for cake, absolutely. Jenifer, thank you so much for coming on, and it's great to hear of all the work that you continue to do in our community. It's great to know that you are still so involved in giving back.
Thank you. Great to be here.